Welcome to the Strong Youth Project, where our mission is to improve organized sport experiences for youth, parents, coaches, and other mentors via education and evidence-based practice.
Welcome to the SYP podcast. My name is Parker Dean. I'm one of the students with the Strong Youth Project. I'm actually one of the original members, starting it with Dr. Seeley and Justin. And so today we're going to be discussing a topic here given by Dr. Zack Beddoes. And Zack Beddoes received his BS and MA degrees from Brigham Young University and his PhD at the University of Texas at Austin. His research is primarily focused on supporting structures and team dynamics that facilitate collaboration, collective action, and bridge building within physical education and sport contexts. Dr. Beddoes has extensive experience working with youth in a variety of coaching settings, including football, basketball, baseball, and golf. He prepares physical education and coaching majors to guide young people in the process of living healthful, active, and fulfilling lifestyles. Dr. Beddoes believes in the potential of youth sports to better the lives of the rising generation when conducted in developmentally appropriate ways. So with that introduction, we'd just like to thank you for joining us today. And kind of, I don't know, a little background into me. I'm a new father. I've got a 1-year-old son turning 1 on Friday. And so something that I've always loved is sports. And my dad really encouraged that with me and was actually a coach of mine. And so I'm really interested to pick your brain a little bit about coaching techniques with that. And so to kind of start off, I just wanted to ask what the differences between physical activity for young kids is the difference between that and for physical activity for adults.
For sure. Congratulations.
Yeah,
by the
thank
way.
you. Yeah.
You say a 1-year-old?
1-year-old,
Just
yeah.
turned 1. That's fantastic. So we have 5 kids, and so that's been an interesting experience for us. So physical activity. Sometimes I think that we look at kids and we think, wow, they're just miniature adults. They're just like adults, but they're just small. And if you really look at the way that kids move, one interesting thing to do is to go out and just observe a recess. At an elementary school. And what you'll find is you're not going to see treadmills where you're going to have a lot of steady state kids just jogging around. Mostly what you'll see is a lot of intermittent moving. So they give everything they have and then they rest. And then they give everything they have and then they rest. And so it's this interesting, interplay of I'm going to catch my breath and then I'm going to go. I'm going to catch my breath and then I'm going to go. And so when you think about kids, especially elementary children, you really, a coach or a teacher really needs to adapt to their to the way they move and the way that it's not a steady state thing. You can imagine if I took 3rd graders and said, okay, let's go run 2 miles. Probably within 30 seconds, there'd be pushing and shoving and they would be off task and they get really bored really easy and they get tired really quickly.
Okay, yeah.
So
no, I even find as myself playing with sports with my friends, I get distracted easily. So I can imagine with the attention span a little bit less, it might get a little more crazy. Mm-hmm. And kind of thinking back in my youth experience with large groups, it's really easy for kids to get off task or off focus at least with sports. And so it could be daunting maybe as a new coach coming out and looking at a team full of, let's say, 8-year-olds playing soccer. I know I was a crazy 8-year-old playing soccer, but how would you say is a good approach to when you're teaching those young or trying to coach a group of young athletes?
Yeah, when you think about, young athletes and you have physical education and then you have sport coaching, and there are a lot of things that overlap and there are things that are different, but kids are kids. I think we can all visualize, a 3rd grade soccer where everyone is just like bees on honey following the ball around and
the kick and chase method,
the kick and chase method. And if you stop someone and say, what are you doing and why are you doing it? And they don't know what, they're just kind of running around and stuff. But The first thing from my perspective is to help them just fall in love with physical activity, to just find a way to really intrinsically enjoy what they're doing. That's something. I know that we want to produce, we want product, we want to win and all that kind of stuff. And, those things are important sometimes, but just the process to be your product, to be able to give really accentuate the positive, give really good feedback, specific feedback, but, just not take yourself too seriously and temper your expectations a little bit. And the thing is we have kids from all across the continuum as far as like their abilities and their experience. Mm-hmm. And so sometimes we underestimate their ability, but then we overestimate their experience. And so they need to be taught more than they need to be like yelled at, for example. Right.
I know I learned better that way.
So, yeah.
No, that's really interesting. And speaking of that intrinsic motivation, I find with a lot of things in life, if you're not intrinsically motivated to do anything, it's really hard to learn and really hard to continue doing things. And that's one of the challenges we see with youth sports is, especially with yelling and from coaches and all that, it could really damper someone's spirits to learn and have fun while playing sports. And so I was just kind of curious, what's an easier way to motivate children and youth in the physical activity setting?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things kind of drawing on the motivational literature where, especially when they're young, creating, sometimes we create what's called an ego-centric environment where it's just all comparisons and I'm going to compare myself against someone else. And, that's kind of normal because that's what we do, but having a task-centered environment where they're really measured against their task, one of the classic thing, if you go watch a cross-country meet, mm-hmm. They talk about, hey, what did you PR today? Did you PR? And it's all this, it's just based off of their personal record and their personal best. But, creating a sense of competence. You have competence and you have autonomy and you have relatedness. So competence is this idea that I can do something, I can do a given task well enough to play. One example I think of that is the recent craze about pickleball.
Oh,
and I've wondered. We've done a little research on why in the world pickleball. But if you think about pickleball, I taught my dad how to play in like 5 minutes. And they're not going to be really great, but they're competent enough to be able to play the game quickly. And so a sense of competence, and that means to modify everything. Sports enthusiasts, it's going to be 11-on-11 football and it's going to be 5-on-5 basketball. But to be able to modify the equipment, to modify the rules, to modify, everything you can possibly modify so that they can feel a sense of competence in what they're doing. And then having choice, having accountability that way, it's kind of self-accountability. And then this idea of this social relatedness. Those three, we call them nutriments in motivational theory, seem to help further them along towards this intrinsic motivation, more so than, let's say, promising a snow cone after a baseball game or something like that.
A good old reward.
Right.
Yeah, no, I feel like those are a little bit more extrinsic. Would you say they're more goal or outcome oriented, I guess you could say.
Yes.
And so that could be very disappointing when you lose a game and you don't get your snow cone,
you don't
right?
get your snow cone. Right.
Yeah, no, that could be kind of tough. And I feel like that could be a pitfall maybe when teaching or trying to motivate, at least intrinsically, young athletes. What are some other things that you might have to guard against while you're trying to intrinsically motivate your athletes?
This I don't mean to sound this negative or come across in a cruel sense, but I think a teacher and a coach first has to understand that it's not about them. Mm-hmm. It's no longer about them, and that's one thing that it's hard for me to guard against, and I think a lot of coaches is, maybe my reputation's on the line because people can see the product, right?
They can see the record.
they can see the record, and so I think part of the motivation, and it goes back to the old saying, they don't know, that people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care and stuff like that. But I think there is something to do that when they feel a sense of you have their best interest. Yeah, you're going to work them hard, And sure, you're going to challenge them, but at the end of the day, it's not about you, it's about them. And that's probably an oversimplification, but I think that's a really good place to start. And it's harder to do than a lot of people would think, because we want to live out our glory days again. And, we want to go back. Our body's hurt right now. And, we can't compete like we used to compete. Right. And a lot of coaches come from where they competed at very high levels. And so that competition is missing. And so it's easy to project that onto, even at a very young age, to kids. So
yeah, no, that's super interesting. And I find that I have had coaches that do want to live out their glory days, and they're taking it out on me. And I've had other coaches that whether the outcome is good or bad, they're proud of the amount that I've learned and the distance I've come just from beginning the season to the end of the season. So I can see that it's very different with coaches, and kind of shifting gears. I mean, I feel like you have some experience with like physical education and in schools and things like
sure.
that.
Yeah.
So what are the differences between maybe coaching a sports team or youth sports team versus maybe if you're a physical education professional and doing that with a classroom, let's say, or a class?
That there are so many crossovers, but there are differences as well. First, I think, is the clientele. With sports, I remember having, as a middle school teacher, having sometimes 70 students in a class.
Wow.
And if you can imagine, they're all different abilities and skills and
wide range
desires, and you know what I mean. And so some of them don't want to be there at all. Some of them love it. Some want to do basketball every day. Some of them hate basketball, and so when you have a team, then I coached basketball, and then you have 8, 10, 12 kids who are fairly homogenous, relatively in skill, and they want to be there unless their parents are
they're there
making them.
But another reason.
And so as far as physical education, again, when you're teaching physical education, so much of it is based off of first understanding where the students are. And so meeting them where they are and allowing them to succeed on their own terms. Like I say, choice. So we give, rarely would I have like a 5-on-5 basketball game, for example. And it goes back to that, okay, we're going to build skills, but we're going to do it in a fun way. And, when you start getting a little older and you're in a coaching setting, sure, you can start focusing a little bit more on, okay, these things are going to help us to win and certain things like that. But I think it's still a process. I really believe that kids, and observing kids for so long, that they'll be tight. They'll come out of the gate sluggish if you focus only on performance, on outcome, on we're going to win, as opposed to, you're just going to go out and do what you've been practicing and doing. And so definitely some overlap there, but I would say, I guess the final thing I would say is in physical education, athletes, you have some that are in your PE class, for example, and they're on these accelerated teams, and then you have others who have never touched a ball. I mean,
their first time in that.
It's unbelievable, and you think about what we're asking teachers to do. You go look at the basketball team out here, and you say there are probably more coaches than there are players, and yet we have one PE teacher and dozens and dozens of students with vastly different abilities and things. And so I would honestly say that there are probably a handful. Let's say you had 50 or 60 in a class, which is not uncommon in junior high around here.
Yeah.
You're probably going to have 4 or 5 students who really need your help. Like, really, it's not, they're going through some really hard emotional times, physical. They really need your help. And so to be able to really find the one, and that sounds like it's an easy thing, but to identify 2 or 3 or 4 who really need you, and I think you can make a big difference in their lives that way. Yeah,
and I think part of the purpose of this project is to help us find the one or the two, which is as much of a worldly thing as well as a spiritual thing. So
yeah, for sure.
Really cool connection there. But I think, would you say that it's just as much as finding your intrinsic motivation as a coach or teacher, is it just as important as finding that and helping nurture that in an athlete?
Finding your own intrinsic
intrinsic, right?
Yeah, I think that at some point every coach, any leader of youth needs to really probe and critique their reasons for doing what they're doing. And, hopefully it's an intrinsic desire and love for the kids to build them as people first. I mean, you think of the opportunity you have as a coach, for example, to build long after the end of the season and the score and the championship. They're going to remember so many things about what you taught them, and just this time, you have such a precious time, and it goes so fast with kids. So they'll remember you, and they'll remember all of the lessons you taught when you didn't say anything, and so I think a coach definitely needs to look inside and say, what am I doing? You're never going to be perfect, but what am I doing this for? Yeah. And is it intrinsically motivated, or is there some sort of external pull of, maybe it's getting noticed or popularity or whatever, rewards or something like that, for sure. I think that's important.
That's awesome. No, I really like that. And just kind of thinking about how that applies to my life, I find there's a lot of good that I could do if I find the motivation in myself and be able to help that with my son or my future son's teams. I don't know.
I'm excited for you.
Yeah, no, I'm really excited too. And I love that my dad was my coach, and that's kind of something that I aspire to be. And so I think he was able to instill that motivation just for the love of the game. It always helps to know what you're doing, especially when you're being a coach and in that sense. But I love sports, and that's been something that's been kind of given me and instilled in me. So
well, and just to say, just to make sure that I'm expressing the things the way I feel them, I'm not suggesting any lowering of expectations or standards. Right. Kids, will not rise to low expectations because they don't have to, right? And so, holding high expectations, it doesn't mean that you're that you have to be loud and cuss and everything. It just means that you're, those are my expectations, but in a loving way, helping the kids to meet those expectations. And it doesn't mean that you can't have them, because high expectations are super important, for sure. Yeah.
And to go along with that, to kind of summarize a lot of that, what should the PE instructors or coaches, like maybe a list or a brief summary of what are the main things that they should be focusing on with their athletes and their students? If you could summarize it just a little bit. It was a lot, so no worries. But
there are, that is a tough summary. There are a lot of things that you can focus on. And really, if you look at the domains, so you have your psychomotor domain, which is the education of the physical body, right? And so it's teaching someone how to throw, teaching someone how to skip. Those are all important. Those are important skills. But then there are also the cognitive domain, which is the knowledge that they obtain. So, for example, you have to know how to run a pick and roll before you can run a pick and roll, right? Yeah. And then there's the affective part, and the way I kind of summarize that is just being a good human, understanding how to be a responsible citizen, a reflective learner in life. Those, I think, sometimes if we stay with, okay, here are the skills, how many feet, you have a quiz, how many feet, is the foul line, 15 feet. Okay, great, fantastic. But the elevated questions of, okay, how do we apply what we're learning as far as our character development in not only in a physical activity setting, but take that into life and responsibility and things. So I think for me, when it comes down to it, it's the life lessons. So that using physical activity and wellness and sport as a vehicle to teach certain lessons of wellness and just life lessons that they will carry throughout the rest of their life. I think if you pinned me down and said what's the most important, I think I would probably even lean toward the affective domain. Yeah.
No, and I think it's a great medium sports is a great medium to drive that and to kind of teach that with life skills. Also kind of talking about that and doing some reading, the social emotional learning, would that be part of like a domain, or is that like a subgroup of that? Or
sure, yeah, it could.
If you want to touch on that, yeah.
No, it could be in the affective domain, and recently in physical education we've added the social domain as well. But yeah, social and emotional learning. I would argue not only do we not really get an emotional education. Kids don't, but most adults haven't either. And we see that all you have to really do is attend enough youth sports, youth sport games or whatever, and you'll see that there are quite a few parents who probably didn't get an emotional education, or they're struggling with those types of things. I saw several this past weekend, and so social emotional learning is this idea of my relationship with myself, my self-management, my decision making, but it has to do with how I relate to you. Can we respectfully disagree? Can we disagree without being disagreeable? How are we going to resolve conflict? All those types of things where, from what I understand from a lot of teachers and principals, and that kids maybe aren't as skilled maybe at those types of things as they once were. And so being very intentional and deliberate in helping them resolve those conflicts, not necessarily always stepping in, but giving them strategies to do that. Because a lot of things that they see, they witness on TV, for example, and they're watching games, it's just the opposite of that. And so really fighting an uphill battle that way. And so physical education can become a vehicle to teach some of those life skills, because people they're gonna work with people who are different from them, and they're gonna have missionary companions that are different from them, and at times their spouse is going to disagree with them. And so learning these skills at a young age, I think sports can do that, but it has to be intentionally
driven at, right?
Yeah.
No, and just speaking on my experience, I feel like being on a sports team, and I mean, I also was a musician in high school too, and so I had various large groups of people that I had to interact with. And so I feel like, unintentionally, now thinking back, I feel like I definitely was driven, at least socially, by how I'd react to certain situations, and maybe the stress of being in a performance or a game and having to react to my environment. And so that's super interesting, and I think we're kind of winding down a little bit more on time, and so I just kind of wanted to end with your thoughts on the physical education and how it's being taught today in schools, and what your hope is through the Strong Youth Project, what you might be able to change. What is something that we could do better?
Oh, man.
If there's one thing.
Well, there are a lot of things that that you can point to, and some of those are just they're systemic, and it's very difficult to change. It's hard to steer a big ship, and education and physical education is that way, and it's been institutionalized, and it's something that we're all socialized to grow. You go through the K through 12 experience, and we have thousands and thousands of hours of experiences, and so we serve what the literature calls an apprenticeship of observation. And so we say, this is what physical education is, or this is what, and then it doesn't really matter what we learn in college sometimes. We just go back to what we were so used to growing up. And you think about that, you don't do that as a plumber, you don't do that as but as a teacher, as an educator, you serve this. And so you start to develop these subjective theories about this is what it means to teach, or this is what it means to. So I think we can start with kind of our own subjective theories and critique those. Obviously, policy. You could look at all kinds of things, like making sure that the numbers in class are equitable, not 60, not 70. Those are all types of structural things that we could talk about. But I think really when it comes down to it, if there was one thing, is if we can first turn the kids on to physical activity and wellness and some responsibility, like that they are responsible, they are change agents, they can be change agents, and help them to understand that they have autonomy, they have the ability to make changes in their life regardless of what their family circumstances have been. All these things, they can make a change. They are not objects to be acted upon, right?
Yeah.
They are agents, and they're agents of change. And when students and when athletes start to realize that so much is in their control, even though perhaps maybe so much has been out of their control, when they focus on what they can control, it's a skill I think that can really be beneficial in their lives. And so there's a lot there, a lot we could talk about change, but just being able to inspire the youth I think is, I guess, the broad way to say that.
Awesome. No, I really like that. That's the whole goal of the Strong Youth Project is to help inspire. And I really appreciate the conversation that we've had and had all these great thoughts brought to our the forefront of our mind. And I'll definitely be applying that to my life as I'm a growing parent and all that. And so really thank you for that,
Thank
this
you.
time. And we'd like to thank all our listeners as well. We'll catch you next time on the Strong Youth Podcast.